Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to.
Shalom and welcome to Waters in the Wilderness, a ministry of Hoshana, Rabbah Biblical Discipleship Resources. I'm Natan Lawrence, speaking to you today from my library. And today I have a message for you entitled, The Two Sticks Message in 2 Minutes. Now, honestly, I probably won't get it done in 2 minutes. It'll probably be more like 22 minutes. Bear with me. I'm not Yeshua, who in his wisdom and incredible understanding could speak an entire volume in one sentence. I haven't mastered that skill yet. But we are going to take this subject, which is a very large subject, and try to make it as short as possible. Now you might say, what is this two sticks message? I might be saying, grasshopper message or something like that. That's about as much relevance as some of this might have to you, or this message. But literally this two sticks message, or you might call it the two trees message, is a message that permeates the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. In fact, entire chapters and entire books of the Bible are dedicated to this message. And to understand this message is to understand Abraham, the children of Israel, the covenants of Israel, the Torah, the gospel message, the message of Yeshua, the message of the gospel to the Gentiles as preached by the disciples of Yeshua and the apostles, and ultimately to understand the relevance of the New Jerusalem. This is a huge message, and much could be said about it. Multiple books could be written, numerous sermons could be preached on this subject. But again, like I said, I'm going to try to condense this down to a very short teaching. Now, the biblical prophets liken the nation of Israel to an olive tree in several places, such as Jeremiah, I believe, chapter 11. But this olive tree was split into two trunks. So you have this trunk, and then you have an olive tree with a branch going this way and a branch going that way. And that's what the nation of Israel was like. One of those branches was called the northern kingdom, or Samaria, or Ephraim, or the house of Israel. And the other branch, or the other trunk that went the other direction, was called the southern kingdom, or known as the southern kingdom, and was the house of Judah, or called the Jews. And their headquarters was in Jerusalem. Now, this is an important history to understand, because at some point in time in Israel's history, these branches were broken off of the olive tree. But Elohim promised through the prophets of the Old Testament, the Tanakh, that he would graft these trunks back in. And we see that theme carried forth in the New Testament. For example, the writings of Paul, Romans chapter 11, where he speaks about an olive tree and branches being grafted in. So before we, so we had one nation that branched into two trunks. Eventually those trunks were ripped off by Elohim, and we'll see why in a minute. And then he said that down at some point in the future he would put the two trunks back together again. And then the nation would become one nation under King Yeshua. And he prophesied that that would happen at the second coming of Yeshua. So it's a very relevant message. But before we get into this, we need to review some family history. Now, some 4,000 years ago, back in the book of Genesis, Yehovah entered into a special relationship with Abraham and his descendants, who became known as the children of Israel. It was Yehovah's plan to use the nation of Israel to be like a spiritual light or a magnet to the world, to draw people to the light of his Torah, to the light of his truth, to the light of Elohim, of God. And that's why he placed Israel there in the center of the world, at the known world at that time, right strategically placed in the trade routes between the continents, the major continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe to the north. because they were to be a light to the nation and introduce the world to Yehovah Elohim, the God of Israel, and in that thereby evangelize the world. But as we know, Israel and Elohim entered into a covenantal relationship with them and said, if you obey me, you will be blessed, and I will use you to gather in the nations into a special relationship with me. But as you know, Israel did not obey Elohim. They eventually went into apostasy, and they went against his word, against his Torah. They broke his covenants. They went after the idols of the pagans and the gods of the pagans, and they turned away from Elohim. And so the curses that God promised to them that they would come on Israel if they didn't obey him came on Israel. And as a result, Israel was split into two nations, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And eventually, both of those nations, because of their sin and apostasy, Torahlessness, turning away from Elohim, they were taken over by pagan nations. And then the Jews of the southern kingdom, of the kingdom of Judah, or the house of Judah, and then the Israelites of the northern kingdom, called the house of Israel, or Ephraim, or Manasseh, or Samaria. It had various names, but those were the 10 northern tribes. They were carried off into captivity as well. And from that point on, the Jews and the Israelites were dispersed throughout the known world. Eventually, they scattered all over the place. And the prophets spoke about this, how they would be literally disseminated throughout the world, even to the various furthest islands. And we know that there are Jewish people scattered all around the world, in every nation of the world just about. There are little communities. And the same happened, that was the southern kingdom, but the prophets of the Bible speak that the same thing would happen to the northern kingdom as well. They lost their identity, they forgot who they were. Whereas the Jews to this day, many of them still know who they are. So basically, Yehovah called Abraham to start a nation. It was one nation made up of 12 tribes. And Yehovah brought these tribes out of Egypt, and en route to the promised land, they became one nation with their own with laws and a constitution called the Torah. And like I said, Elohim promised to bless them if they would obey him, but curse them if they disobeyed his commandments. And as we said, they disobeyed him, and he split them into two nations. So it was like one nation with a split personality. And then, eventually, these two nations went in different directions, were taken into captivity, and then eventually they wandered throughout the nations of the world, as the biblical prophets say in numerous places. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that the prophets that prophesied what would happen to the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, and the house of Judah, or the house of Ephraim and the house of Judah, the same prophets also prophesied that these nations at some point in time would be regathered. Not just the Jews, not just the southern kingdom, but all the nations of Israel, that all the tribes of Israel, I should say, who became nations and were scattered throughout the earth. So all of these, despite the tragedy that occurred to the descendants of Abraham, Yehovah promised to spiritually awaken his people in the nations to where he had scattered them and bring them back to him. And he would regather them after they repented and recognized their sinful ways and recognized that they were his children, that he would regather them and bring them back to the land of Israel at some point in time in the future. And we see that indeed the Jewish people from the southern kingdom, some of them came back after the Babylonian exile, and some of them came back in more modern, more recent times, in the 1800s, the 1900s, after Israel became a state in 1948. But the other tribes have not yet come back. But this regathering of all the tribes, this incredible plan, is revealed in the pages of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, as we are about to discuss next. Now, the Torah is the foundation of the Bible, and it's also the foundation of the two sticks message. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible literally are the beginning of the Bible, and everything kind of branches or flowers out of this part of the Scriptures. And the prophecies concerning the scattering of the northern kingdom, or Ephraim and Manasseh, and the southern kingdom, the Jews, among the nations of the earth, and them being regathered in the last days, is grounded and predicted or prophesied in the Torah. For example, in Genesis 48:14, when Jacob in his old age was prophesying over the sons of Joseph, he was prophesying over Ephraim and Manasseh. And in this prophecy in Genesis 48:14 through 16, he makes some amazing revelations. First of all, he prays over them and he crosses his hands like this and lays his hand on his two grandsons. And he prophesies over them. And in so doing, he's making the fish symbol like this. If I get that on the camera, a fish symbol, but he's also making the symbol of the Paleo-Hebrew letter Tav. It looks like a T or an X in ancient Paleo-Hebrew, which pictographically, it was a picture symbol, and it meant sign or seal of the covenant. And this cross looked like our small T, or like a cross. And like I said, it literally meant sign or seal the covenant. And he made this sign over them, and he began to prophesy over them. And he spoke about the messenger, or the angel, or the messenger of Elohim that had redeemed him from all evil. May that same messenger from Elohim that redeemed me from evil, from death, also bless these lads, bless my sons. And then he said, in verse 16 of Genesis 48, he says, and may your descendants grow literally into a multitude of nations in the midst of the earth, as it says in most of our Bibles. But in the Hebrew, if you go to the Art Scroll Stone Edition Tanakh, it literally, the word dagah means fish, and the word dagah, or to grow, is dagah, meaning fish, and it literally says, thus, this verse can be translated, may they, that is the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, proliferate abundantly like fish in the midst of the land. So perhaps we can look at the prophecy that Jacob made over his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and give us a clue as to who their end-time descendants would be. So I ask you the question, what people group on the earth today has the sign of the fish, the sign of the Paleo letter Hebrew Tav that looks like a cross, and speaks about a messenger from heaven that will redeem or save them from all evil? Well, I can tell you who it's not. It's not the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Hare Krishnas, even the Jews. It would be the Christians. And that's who Jacob said that the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh would be. Now, moving right along quickly. In Jewish thought, Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 10, really forms the basis for the concept of the 12 tribes being regathered in the end times after their rebellion or their apostasy, and they're being scattered to the nations. He said he would regather them in the last days. And the Jewish sages call this event the final redemption. It's throughout their writings, and they predict that it will happen at the beginning of the Messianic age, or roughly about the year 6000, which we are in right now. It's been about 2,000 years since the time of Yeshua, and before that there was about 4,000 years going back to the time of Adam. So Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 10 says, and I'm going to kind of condense this down, now it shall come to pass when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse. This is Moses prophesying over the children of Israel before his death. The blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where Yehovah your Elohim drives you, and you return to Yehovah your Elohim and obey his voice, according to all that I command you today, you and your children with all your heart and with all your soul, that Yehovah your Elohim will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the nations where Yehovah your Elohim has scattered you. Then Yehovah your Elohim will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He shall prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers, and Yehovah your Elohim will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. and you will again obey the voice of Yehovah and do all his Torah commandments, which I command you today. Yehovah your Elohim will make you abound in all the work of your hands, and the fruit of your body, and the increase of your livestock, and in the produce of your land for good. For Yehovah will again rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the voice of Yehovah your Elohim, to keep his Torah commandments and his statutes, which are written in the book of the Torah, or the book of the law. And if you turn to Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. Deuteronomy 30:1 through 10. Now, this is a message that numerous Jewish sages, Orthodox Jewish sages, have recognized is an end-time prophecy speaking about the regathering, not just of the Jews, which come from the tribe of Judah primarily, but of all the tribes, all the 12 tribes. In fact, this is something that numerous, like I said, Orthodox Jewish sages down through the ages affirm that Ephraim and Manasseh, along with their brother Judah, and all of their companion tribes, would be scattered throughout the nation, just like the Bible and the Torah and the prophets say, but then they would be supernaturally regathered by Yehovah at the end of the age to fulfill Bible prophecy. And like I said, the Jews call this the final redemption. Such notable Jewish sages from the 1st century, or actually the 2nd century, as Elazar ben Hyrcanus, or medieval Torah commentators like Moses Maimonides, known as the Rambam, or David Kimchi, known as Radak, or in the 19th century, the preeminent German Orthodox scholar and Torah commentator Samson Raphael Hirsch, as well as in the 20th century, Menachem Schneerson, the head of the Lubavitcher movement, also other Jewish sages such as Yaakov Emanuel Choquette, along with the Talmud, affirm this truth. They affirm this truth that Ephraim would be regathered. And I have numerous quotations in some of my other writings that I have published where I give you the references where you can find this information. Now, the two sticks message that these Jewish sages, when they recognized that Israel would be regathered, all Israel, not just the Jews, but all Israel, they're not concocting this out of their mind. They are literally going back to the message or the truth of the scriptures to get this message. It is found in not only, like I said, the Torah, but also in the prophets. So the understanding of the Jewish sages with regard to the lost and scattered Israel is not only prophesied in the Torah, but it's also in numerous books in the Old Testament. Like I said, there's whole chapters and even books in the major and the minor prophets that speak of this message, speak about the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, or Ephraim and Manasseh being reunited and regathered and reunited with Judah and brought back into the land of Israel at some future date in the end times. Now, perhaps the most notable prophecy in the entire Old Testament is to be found in Ezekiel, chapters 36 and 37. Now, in chapter 36, Yehovah, through Ezekiel, speaks about his people being scattered through the nations because of their sins, and how in the last days he would regather them. It's kind of a repeat of what we just read in Deuteronomy chapter 30. And Ezekiel says that this would occur because Elohim would pour out his spirit upon them, causing a great spiritual revival to occur, and that would then cause them to repent of their sins and be drawn back to them. So it was going to be a result of a spiritual revival, because Elohim is going to pour out his spirit, and he's going to bring his word, his promises that he prophesied through his prophets to pass in the last days. That's in Ezekiel 36. Now in Ezekiel 37, the first part of that chapter, this is again a prophecy, a vision that Ezekiel had. Yehovah likens Israel to a great army that was been dead for a long time. Remember, it's the valley of the dry bones, and their bones are dry and brittle, and they're kind of clinking together. They've been dead and laying there for a long time. And he says he's going to send his spirit and his breath upon this army of Israelites, and they're going to be raised up. And they're going to come, the bones are going to come together, and it's going to form a whole company of people. And then the second half of Ezekiel 37, we go into the famous two-stick or the two-tree message, which is the title of this teaching today, is based on. Yehovah Elohim says that he tells Ezekiel to take two sticks in his hand, two sticks or two trees or two branches, and one, he says, write down the name of, write on that stick, Joseph, the house of Joseph and his companions. So it'll be Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh, and all the tribes of the northern kingdom, of which there were 10. And then he says, in the other hand, take a stick or a branch and write on it Judah and his companions, which would be Levi and Benjamin and any other of the tribes of the other tribes that might have gotten mingled in with Judah over the years. And he says, and then put these two sticks together and they will become one in your hand. They will become one in your hand. And then he goes on to prophesy and he says, I'm going to resurrect David, and David is going to rule over this united house. Now remember, Israel was split in the time of Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon. They were split into two nations. And that was about 1,500 years BC, before the birth of Yeshua, the Messiah. So this is like 3,500 years ago that they were split. Or actually it's about 3,000 years ago that they were split, about 1,000 BC, roughly, give or take a little bit. But he says they're going to come back together. That hasn't happened yet. That has not happened yet. They're going to come together, all 12 tribes. They're going to become one tree, and they're going to become one in my hand, and David is going to rule over them, and then Elohim, Yehovah Elohim, is going to come and dwell in their midst and rule over all of them. This is a millennial prophecy. It hasn't happened yet. This is something that happens at the end of, or that I should say, after the return of Yeshua the Messiah. Additionally, Isaiah the prophet speaks about this in Isaiah 49, 1 through 6. He also, there are numerous prophets that speak of this prophetic event, these prophetic events, but I've just picked out a couple of the main ones here. But Isaiah tells us in chapter 49 that Yehovah would raise up the Messiah to, quote, bring Jacob back to him so that Israel is gathered to him to raise up the tribes of Jacob, end quote. And then Isaiah goes on to say that through the Messiah, the Gentiles will receive the light of the truth, and he would be Yehovah's salvation. In other words, Elohim would send the Messiah, and he would be salvation, or literally in Hebrew, the word for salvation is Yeshua. So this is a prophecy about Yeshua, Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah, being salvation to the people of Israel who have been scattered around the world in all the nations, but who will be gathered by the message of literally by the message of the gospel. He says that Yeshua, the message of salvation or of Yeshua, would be preached to the ends of the world where all the tribes have been scattered. Or in other words, Yeshua and the message of the gospel is like a huge fishnet that would be preached all across the world, and by this means, just like a fisherman throws a large fishnet out into the ocean to gather in lots of fish, the fish of the sea, remember, Ephraim would become like fish in the midst of the land. And the fish symbol is the sign of, is an early ancient symbol of Christianity, and that Yeshua called the disciples to be fishers of men. Connect the dots here. There's a prophetic undercurrent, undertone, or sub-message going on here. He said that Yeshua, Isaiah inferred that Yeshua would be like the message of Yeshua in the gospel would be like a huge fishnet by the means of which Yehovah would regather the tribes of Israel who had been scattered all across the earth, along with all the Gentiles with whom they intermarried in all the nations where they were scattered. Now, let's move now into the New Testament, or the testimony of Yeshua, where Yeshua, the Messiah, came to proclaim the gospel message. Going back to Abraham, Elohim raised up Abraham as a father of the tribes to be, and those tribes, or the children of Israel, were to be a light to the nation. But also, Elohim predicted in the Abraham covenant that through your seed all nations would be blessed. And Paul in the book of Galatians says that that seed refers to Yeshua. So basically, Elohim had a plan B. He knew in his prescience that Israel would stall out, would fail in his plan to evangelize the nations, and itself would become like the nations, would go into apostasy and be scattered throughout the nations as a form of punishment. But his plan B, which he knew all along this was going to happen, would be to raise up the Messiah who would then come, and through the message of Messiah and the disciples that Messiah would raise up, this message would be proclaimed to gather in all the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's what Yeshua the Messiah, he knew what his mission was. In fact, in Matthew 15:24, he says, I am not come, but to regather, or for the lost sheep out of the house of Israel. And then in Matthew 10, verse 6, he chooses and commissions his 12 disciples. 12 disciples, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we know that after the death of Yeshua, the 12 disciples went all over the known world, helping to regather the 12 disciples, and the 12 nations, or the 12 tribes, starting first with the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea, and then from there on out. And so there were 12 tribes, 12 apostles that Yeshua chose, and in the Gospels he said that they would become kings or rulers or leaders eventually over the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, that didn't happen in the lives of the apostles, but that would happen later on. That's a prophecy that Yeshua promised and he made in the Gospels to his disciples, and it hasn't been fulfilled yet. So we know this is yet a future event when they will rule over the 12 tribes of Israel, not just the tribe of Judah. That's one tribe, but there's 11 other tribes. So Yeshua chose 12 disciples to go to the 12 tribes of Israel to bring the message of the gospel, and Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, to all the nations where the tribes of Israel had been scattered. And just before his ascension to heaven, in Acts chapter 1, Yeshua commissions them again. He says, they said, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? This was the last question they asked of Yeshua. And he said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons. So don't worry about the regathering of all the tribes. Just get out there and start regathering them. Go first to Jerusalem and to Judea. Go first to the Jews. And then go to Samaria, who were of mixed Israelite, Gentile descent or patronage. And then from there go to the uttermost parts of the earth, where all the Jews and the Israelites, that is those of the northern kingdom, had been scattered. This was his final commission to them. Now, as I mentioned, some of his disciples were fishermen from the Galilee region. In fact, you can go up to Capernaum today and see the house of Peter. It's still there. And Capernaum is right on the Sea of Galilee, within just a 5-minute walk. I mean, it's right there. You can walk down just a few hundred feet and be right there on the Sea of Galilee. So these fishermen, like Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, were fishermen. And Yeshua, when he was calling them, he says, you're no longer going to be fishers of fish, but fishers of men. You're going to go after the lost tribes of Israel that have been scattered throughout the nations of the world, throughout the seas, if you will, of humanity. And then he also called not only the 12 to go out and be fishers of men, but he called 70 disciples. He's called them beside the 12. Interesting, 70 is a significant number in the Bible, since if we go to Genesis chapter 10, there's 70 nations that were descended from Noah. Interesting, 70 disciples to go after to go reach out after the 70 nations where the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered. Very significant. This is very important. So Yeshua knew what he was doing. He raised up 12 disciples to go after the 12 tribes, and then 70 disciples to go after or go fetching after or helping to gather in the 12 tribes of Israel that was scattered throughout the 70 nations. Now this regathering is a process. It started at the time of Yeshua, and it will culminate, that is when he was here the first time, but it's been going on for 2,000 years, and it will culminate at his second coming going into the millennium. So this has been a long process. Now, let's go and discuss what the Apostle Paul teaches about this. Even Paul the Apostle had a sense of the message of the 12 tribes of Israel being scattered throughout the nations, and that he was to go to them, or the Gentiles. In Romans chapter 11, we see the famous olive tree message where Paul talks about the Gentiles being grafted back into the olive tree of Israel because they had been broken off and become wild branches. They had become wild because they had mixed with the Gentile nations, intermarried with them, and had become Gentiles, living like Gentiles, looking like Gentiles, kind of like the prodigal son in the prodigal son parable. They literally adopted the pagan customs, eating the food of the pagan, worshiping on pagan days, on and it goes. Adopting the religions of the pagans. But he said, go gather these Gentiles and bring them in, and let's graft them back in to the olive tree of Israel. And he speaks to them as if they were descendants of Israel, who Jeremiah in Jeremiah 11:16 talks about because of apostate Israel, both Judah and Ephraim, Elohim would break them off of the olive tree of Israel, and eventually they would be scattered and go into captivity in the nations around the world. Now, in Romans chapter 9, Paul likens the Gentiles to those of Ephraim, about which both Hosea and Isaiah prophesied. Hosea was a prophet to the northern kingdom, and Paul quotes both from Isaiah and Hosea, and the prophecies that Paul is quoting in reference to the Gentiles there in Rome, he's relating that back to and saying that the message being preached to the Romans and the other Gentiles is a fulfillment of the prophecies that were directed toward the northern kingdom of Israel in both Hosea and Isaiah. So Paul is making the connection that these Gentiles, among them are probably lost Israelites who are responding now to the gospel message. And then in Ephesians chapter 2 is a very significant passage where Paul tells us that the Gentiles, speaking of the Gentiles, that they are to become part of the covenants and nation of Israel through faith in Yeshua the Messiah, and that they are to be reunited with their Jewish brothers through the gospel message, through Yeshua the Messiah, through the redemption of his blood, just as Ezekiel prophesied in his famous 2:6 prophecy, where he said that these two nations, Ephraim and Joseph, or Ephraim and their companions, and Judah and his companions, will be put together and become one stick, one nation, under David and under Yeshua the Messiah, the son of David, who would be ruling and reigning as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords on this earth during his millennial kingdom. Let me read this passage in Ephesians 2:11 through 19. I want you to hear it. Don't just take my words for it. You need to hear this for yourself, because this is a message, an important message that it resonates through the entire Bible, and Paul states it all right here very clearly. And I quote, starting in verse 11, "Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh," or in times past, as it says in the King James Bible, you were Gentiles in the flesh. You were in times past tense Gentiles, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth or the citizenship or the nation of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So he defines a Gentile in this sense as one who has no hope and without God. I'm not a Gentile. I have hope and I have God. And if you're born again and you know Yeshua as your Lord and Savior and your sins have been washed in his blood, And you are not a Gentile, for you are not without God and without hope. But you are now a redeemed Israelite and are part of the commonwealth or the citizenship or the nation of Israel, according to the Apostle Paul. Continuing. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were afar off, you were Gentiles scattered far away in all the nations, but you have been brought near by the blood of Christ, or of the Messiah. For he himself is our peace, our shalom, who has made both one, both Jew and Gentile, one in him, and has broken down the middle wall of separation, has separated the two. That wall that existed in the second temple that kept Jews and Gentiles apart. The Gentiles from entering into the temple area. So as to create in himself, in Yeshua, one new man from the two. One new man called redeemed Israel. One stick in his hands. Joseph and his companions, the 10 northern tribes, I should say, and Judah, the southern kingdom of the Jews. And he put them together in Yeshua, in the cross, through the blood of Yeshua, through the preaching of the gospel message, to become one tree, one olive tree with one trunk, but with two branches coming up, but one trunk, going clear back to the Torah, back to the covenants of Israel that Elohim had, the Mosaic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, and all the way back to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and back to Abraham himself, the father of us all. In fact, in Galatians chapter 3, well, let me finish reading here in chapter 2 of Ephesians. For through him, that's through Messiah, we both have access, both Jews and Gentiles, or ex-Gentiles, we might say, have access by one Spirit to the Father. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers or foreigners or Gentiles, but fellow citizens or Israelites with the saints and members of the household of God. If you're born again and know Yeshua, and you are part of the household of Israel, and you are Israel, you are no longer without God and without hope. You are no longer a Gentile, according to the Apostle Paul here. And then the capstone on this is in Galatians 3:29, where Paul says that all those who are in Messiah, those who are in Messiah are literally the sperm. That's what the Greek word is, a sperma. It literally means the offspring or the descendants of Abraham, thus making a born-again Christian an Israelite in Paul's eyes. I don't understand how that's all possible, but that's what Paul says. If you are a child of Abraham, or if you are in Messiah, then that makes you a child of Abraham. Period. I believe it and receive it by faith. Now, Revelation. I said that this message is carried throughout the entire book of the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Let's end up here in the book of Revelation. Chapter 7 and chapter 14 there, John prophesies of an end-time regathering of the 144,000 Israelites. It doesn't say 144,000 Jews. It says 144,000 from the 12 tribes. And it lists the tribes, all the tribes, and it lists Judah. The name Jew comes from Judah. Judah is one of the 12 tribes. So there is going to be an end-time regathering of, initially of the 144,000, whether that's a literal number or a figurative number, I don't know. But there's going to be a regathering of the saints. I believe this is the bride of Yeshua, and they're likened to 12,000 from each tribe. And then we get to the end of the book of Revelation in chapter 21. There we have a vision of the New Jerusalem, which comes down to the earth from heaven. And there's 12 gates of that city. And the 12 gates are all named after the 12 tribes of Israel. There is no Gentile gate. There's no gate that has the placard over the top that says Gentile for all the Gentiles to come into. No. By that time, only saints were redeemed, glorified saints will be getting into that in the New Jerusalem. And those people will be, maybe they used to be Gentiles, but once they came to Yeshua and were washed in the blood and have been born again and regenerated spiritually And now at this time they will have been resurrected and received their glorified bodies, and they will be adopted into the family of Elohim, and they are now part of Israel, and they will be entering the New Jerusalem through one of the 12 gates named after the 12 tribes of Israel. So this indicates that only redeemed Israelites, some of whom used to be Gentiles, but were grafted in, will be allowed into Elohim's eternal kingdom. So don't call yourself a Gentile, because Gentiles won't get into the New Jerusalem, which is a picture of heaven on earth and eternity in the presence of Elohim. Now, in conclusion, let's quickly kind of review what we have studied here, what we've discussed over the last few minutes. So here laid out before us is the wonderful message of the two sticks of Israel. In summary, the nation of Israel was like a spiritual olive tree planted in the garden of Elohim, which was located in the land of Israel between the three great continents of Africa, Europe, and Asia. Their divine mission was to feed the nations with its fruit. That is the divine mission of Israel, the olive tree, was to feed the nations from its spiritual olive tree. It was to feed the nation from its fruit, the word and the truth of Elohim, and to anoint the nation with its oil, the oil of its spirit, the oil of its light, the oil of its, of the Messiah. Sadly, Israel failed in its commission and instead turned away from Elohim and his Torah laws and was broken off from the olive tree of Israel by Elohim and was banished from the land of Israel, literally kicked out of the land of Israel when they were taken into captivity. Now, eventually, from the nations where they had been scattered, Yehovah, through his prophets, promised to regather them through Yeshua the Messiah as his disciples preached the gospel message of redemption from the sin of Torahlessness. That regathering began at the time of Yeshua and will culminate around the time of his second coming. We're in the process of that regathering right now. It's a slow process. As the Israelites who have been lost and scattered for millennia among the Gentile nations of the world awaken to the gospel message and their need to return to the Elohim of Israel, and they repent of their Torahlessness and pagan practices, Yehovah is regathering them from the nations. He is in the process of grafting them back into the olive tree of Israel, and eventually will bring them back into the land of Israel, where King David will rule over all the tribes of Israel, and the 12 apostles will rule over each of the 12 tribes, and Yeshua will rule over all of it as the King of kings and the Lord of lords. This is the glorious hope of the world to come, leading to the New Jerusalem, where only redeemed and glorified Israelites will be able to enter its 12 gates, which are named after the 12 tribes of Israel. So I ask you this question: through which gate will you enter? Which tribe are you from? There is no Gentile gate. Hallelujah.
Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself in abundance. Seek the Lord while he may be found.